Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to Your Questions. This is a show which will answer all the questions which you send in, and will happen once a week. So it's called Your Questions, and inshallah we'll attempt our best to answer the questions which you have. So the first question which was sent in is as follows. In a Bukhari and Muslim hadith, it mentions that making portraits and likenesses are prohibited in Islam and disliked by Allah the Almighty. Can you please elaborate on this hadith and advise what would be permissible to draw sketch, please? So firstly, we must understand why this hadith was said. And we have to go back to the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. And remember, during his time, idol worshipping was so prevalent, and it was done by almost everybody before Islam came. And so to differentiate the Muslims from the idol worshippers, the Holy Prophet ﷺ said that the drawings or the paintings of people should not be done, because at that time all the paintings that were done, that were painted or drawn, were of these idols, and they were solely for the purpose of idol worship, or shirk as we know it. And so this is why any painting which is done should not be done with the intention of idol worshipping. And that's really the main thing that we need to understand with this hadith. And so we shouldn't think that we aren't allowed to draw anything, or we're not allowed to paint anything, because that goes against what we like to do. There's painters all over the world, and there's people who draw all over the world. But we must firstly understand the intention of doing that act of trying to portray someone in a portrait, and we must be very careful in that way. And we'll delve deeper into this question, and we'll try to answer every angle so that we are fully able to understand what we can and can't do, and what is liked and what is disliked. So firstly, we'll look at this as well. This is another question which was raised to Khalifa Rabi, that what was the difference between Krishna's photo and the Promised Messiah's photo. And really the difference is that with Krishna, it was painted through imagination, and many attributes of Allah the Almighty were attributed with the picture of Krishna, showing him as a godly figure and as a figure that should be worshipped. And so this is unacceptable in Islam, and this is what we call shirk. But when it comes to the Promised Messiah, والسلام, we do not attribute anything out of human attributes to him. And so the photograph of Hazrat Masih Maud والسلام, shows him as the same person who he is, nothing more, and just as a servant of Allah, and not something which we in any way idol worship. And it wasn't drawn out of imagination. It was a picture that was taken directly of the Hazrat Masih Maud والسلام. So through this picture of Hazrat Masih Maud, it actually links people back to the oneness of God, back to the true Allah the Almighty, and not to anything else, not to other gods. And so that's really the stark difference between a picture which is idol worshipped, which is seen as a godly figure, and general pictures which we take every day of people. And we do not take pictures of anyone thinking we're going to worship it, or we're going to idol worship it. And if it is done, then that's where Islam draws the line. And so this also comes into play, this question, are statues allowed in Islam? And again, we must understand that statues in the time of Holy Prophet ﷺ were also put up, and they were worshipped 5 times a day, if not more. But Khalifa Rabi rahimahullah explained this very nicely. He said that in the modern day, when statues are put up, they aren't put up with the intention to be worshipped. They are more put up for the introduction of somebody. But if there is a fear that something will be worshipped, then it's best to avoid it. But as we said, in modern times, statues and sculptures are put up to remember that person and to be introduced to that person. But with mostly, but in some cases as well, in Christianity, for example, they are still making statues of Jesus alayhi salam or Hazrat Maryam alayhi salam to be worshipped, and so that is wrong. So we have the two examples before us in today's world. Khalifa Rabi also mentioned and quoted about Madame Tussauds, which is a attraction site of famous people or well-known people or well-respected people who are wax figures. And he said that if it was haram, then why would you be going there to visit it, to go see it? And so the purpose you are going there is to be introduced to that famous person. And no objection is taken to it. And so again, we must look at the intention of why these things are created, of why portraits, of why sculptures and statues are all created, and then we can understand if we are allowed to go see them, if we're allowed to also partake in them as well. And so this really makes us understand the question, the original question, a bit more about having the right motive when you start such an act. And so it all depends on place to place and situation to situation. The same thing may be found wrong and the same thing may be found right according as it is found to occur. And so just look at everything and understand what that object is, and then you can judge accordingly to yourself with some wisdom, of course. So again, this also begs the question of what is the difference between taking a photo of someone and painting someone. So the difference is when you paint or draw someone, you must again have the right intentions of doing so. It should never be for the sake of worshipping that individual or glorifying them in a way that you start to kiss them, the photo in any way, which is done in Christianity. When they visit temples, they would go up to each picture and they would kiss them, and this is a form of shirk in that way. And so we should avoid doing that. By drawing, it is almost impossible to copy the image Allah has already created, the perfect image which Allah has created. And this is why in Islam it's seen as undesirable, especially to draw portraits of spiritual persons like a beloved Huzur or anyone in the history of Islam, for that matter, because it's almost a dishonor to them, as Allah has created such a perfect being. And it's almost impossible to draw or paint exactly as that figure is. And that's really the main difference between painting and taking a photo, because when you capture a photo, it's capturing everything that is there, just like with Hazrat Masih Maud, and you can't go wrong. It is what it is. So again, both situations must be dealt with according to the circumstance, with wisdom and with love. And so if you are painting in itself isn't wrong. And we can see that with Khalifa Rabi Rahimullah, as he stated, that painting hasn't been made prohibited in Islam. It's the object which is prohibited, the object with which the person is drawing. If that is drawn with the intention of idol worship, then it is completely wrong. If it's not, then it should be okay to. Khalifa Rabi Rahimullah was asked once by a child if a portrait could be taken with him. So Khalifa Rabi Rahimullah understood this to be a photo. And when the child said this, he said, "Of course you can take a portrait of me," meaning a photo of me, "and I would like you to also be in the photo." But then the father stepped in and said, I believe the child means he wants to draw a picture of beloved Huzur. And Huzur replied, "You said take a portrait. To take a portrait and to draw a portrait is completely different." And Khalifa Rabi Rahimullah asked the child laughingly he says, "You want to draw me? No, I do not like to be drawn." And so this shows that it's not desirable by Huzur to have his picture drawn of him, and he didn't like it. But he could have said that, in Islam, you're not allowed to do it. But he said for himself that he did not like his picture being drawn. And so this should also be understood, and this also should be added to the answer of the question given at the start. And so to give honor to these spiritual figures, it is best to avoid drawing them, even if it is out of love. Even if if you are doing it with good intentions, they have been made in their perfect form by Allah the Almighty, just like with all of us. And so to give honor to them, it's best to keep a picture of them, because a picture, as we said, it captures what is there, and we are more drawn towards mistake if we try to draw or paint such figures. So this was a short answer to the question which was given at the start. I hope you are able to have increased your knowledge, and you are able to understand what you are and are not allowed to do. So inshallah, may Allah enable us all to fully understand the teachings of Islam and try to be guided in the right way, inshallah. Keep sending in your questions. Once a week we try to answer your questions. So send them in, and we'll try to dissect them together and try to understand them together. Jazakum Allah and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.